COP28. The idea is to advance climate action and leadership through education, so bringing those two worlds together. And the Circle exists to grow a great and powerful community for pushing towards real impact. And that's across different levels, the system level in schools and education, the leadership level, and also the classroom level. What we are aiming for are tangible outputs that transform education towards climate action and leadership. So I know there are people in this room who come from the education side, there are people in this room and online who come from the climate side, and we're delighted that you are together with us today. This session is going to tell you a little bit about the Circle, and it's in 3 different parts. A small introduction to the Circle, a larger section where we are going to have a discussion. I'm joined here by people who share some of the same goals as us, who are going to tell us a little bit about what they do, and we're joined by some people online who will do that as well. There will be time in that section for questions and I hope a little bit of discussion. And then we have a call to action from Earth Day, who have joined us in this session, which we're really excited about. It's the first time that we have come together to work together, and they have a call to action at the end. So the Circle is a group of interested actors, as I said. It's co-led by 4 organizations, the Aga Khan Foundation, who are bringing schools from 10 countries into this conversation. Teach for All, who have, again, a network of teachers and school leaders across the world, who bring them into the conversation. Global School Leaders, who have a network of school leaders, as the title suggests, bringing them into the conversation. And the Learning Planet Alliance, the Learning Planet Institute, which is a network of actors who are working to transform education and who mobilize collective intelligence to do so. So we are in 163 countries in the world. And if you don't know who we are, we hope that you do by the end of this session, and we'd love you to join us. The Circle has 2 parts. It has a goal, and it's also a concept. So it's also a process. The goal of the Circle is to work towards the collective output of a playbook for policymakers at COP28. The process is, as I said at the beginning of the session, a group of friends engaging in regular conversations about issues and themes of common concern. So the meeting today has a section of that process. There's always an opportunity for people who are in this Circle to present on what they've done. We are aware there's not going to be one single solution. And there's always an opportunity to discuss things with peers. That is what a Circle is. We would like to build support and engagement for members among members, and it's open to everybody who would like to join us in this process. To participate in the Circle, you can see this is a diagram of what I've just tried to explain. The black arrow through the middle is the process that we're taking, this informal space for a community of actors to come together with regular meetings on thematic topics, and also to contribute to some of the actions that members are taking. The goal at the end is COP28, the presentation of a playbook to ministers, which we're working on at the moment with Aga Khan. So the arrows at the top show the way the Circle links into this creation of a playbook, which we're currently working with through Aga Khan and the government of Tanzania. And the arrows at the bottom show various touch points throughout the year and a half leading up to COP28, where actors are invited to participate, to join in, to give their expertise, and where also they're able to ask for expertise from the Circle to advance their own aims. So this is one of those touch points. There is the 17 rooms alongside the UN General Assembly in September. We contribute to Teach for All Summer Institutes. We contribute to the Learning Planet Festival on and around the International Day of Education in January. And we contribute to the Aga Khan Schools 2030 Summit, which has just taken place in Tanzania and will take place in Portugal next year. So, as I said, we have got a section now where we are really delighted at very short notice, and we're very grateful for it. We're delighted to be joined by people who are working on this theme of climate and education and the links between the two. We are going to start by a presentation from Lisbeth Steer from the Education Commission on this new report, Education for Climate Action. And then I will ask, in no particular order, several people to speak. So we've got Alex Beard from Teach for All, We've got Judith from the SCDO. I think we've got Jeff from GPE. We have got some others who I think in the audience, and we've got some people online who are going to talk about what they're doing. We've got somebody called Ada from Romania, and will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions and share what you are up to. I've spoken to a few people as they came in who've told me what they're doing, and I hope they feel brave enough to turn on their microphones and share with everybody else. So moving on to section 2, Elizabeth, over to you. Would you like the, thank you very much. Take it away.
All right. Well, it's great to see you all. I think we all feel slightly unprepared for where we are. So I'm really grateful you are all here, and I really want to make this very informal. Hope you can comment. Please feel free to speak up. We want to really keep it quite interactive. So what I wanted to briefly touch on, or what I'd been asked to present, is a piece of work that we have been doing with a number of actors in the space for a little while, trying to kind of find a framing for how to think about the intersection between climate and education. Because we all intuitively feel and know that there is a connection, but it's actually sometimes hard to articulate what are the precise connections. And by identifying those, hopefully we can be more effective in placing ourselves in the conversations that are happening out there in the climate space. I'm sure some of you know that at the moment we have a big summit in Lisbon on oceans. We actually should all be there. I always feel when you go to these climate meetings, you have to search quite hard for education actors. And I'd say I'd connect a personal story to this, because I'm married to someone who really is very passionate about climate. And we have often sat at the dinner table and wondered why our two sectors don't speak enough to each other. And even in the sort of intimacy of a marriage, it's still quite difficult to figure out, if we wanted to do something together, what precisely would we do together? So it's a personal as well as a professional mission for me to try and figure out how we can work together as sectors. So moving on, so this is the report. It's online. You can look on, it's on the Education Commission websites, on other websites as well. There were several people involved, as I said, Educate Girls, the Education Outcomes Fund, the Malala Fund, BCG, Teach for All was very engaged as well. And we had a group of sort of thinkers that came together over a period to try and kind of formulate this framing. So first of all, I think we all came to the table saying education just simply has not been prioritized as a solution to the climate crisis. And we know it is critical to both mitigation and adaptation goals. So and especially to reaching those goals efficiently and fairly. So when we talk about climate justice, this is really where education comes in as well. So first of all, we try to come up with why could we sort of say 3 reasons if we were in the elevator with someone who's working on climate change, if you were in the elevator with Jeff Bezos, why should he care about climate change? He's just set up a big fund on climate. So first of all, the first reason is that in order to achieve net zero, we will need to halve emissions every decade. Now, this decade, we can do this by using technological solutions. And the climate sector is very much focused on infrastructure and green energy and all these types of things that can be solved technologically. But we know that in the next decade, it's going to get much harder. And what will need to happen then is real deep behavioral change. And it is that behavioral change that will be driven by education. So on the path to reducing emissions, we need to educate people to become greener citizens. So that's sort of reason number 1. Reason number two, it's kind of obvious, is that basically 1.2 billion jobs are really dependent on what we call a healthy climate and sort of ecosystem, or they would be at risk if there are big climatic changes. But we know that actually practically all jobs will need to change. And again, that then creates a link to, okay, who is going to reskill? And I've often been in conversations, there's huge conversations now about the transition, decommissioning, decarbonization. You have South Africa spending billions of dollars to move from a coal-intensive to a green economy. And you wonder, but where is the skills piece here? Is anybody thinking about the massive kind of movement of jobs that will create and the skilling that will need to happen in that context? So we need to be at the table in these conversations about decarbonization and decommissioning of coal. The third reason is one that is about very relevant to low income and countries that are under the influence of climate impacts, and that's often low-income countries. They are going to be very affected by obviously all these climate impacts. And the best way for them to be ready and to be resilient is to be educated, because education is something you can take with you. If you have to move or you have to change jobs or you have to do different things, you can use your education to do that. So we talked a little bit about sort of looked around the world at sort of adaptation effects. And we actually had a meeting at COP26 with environment ministers and education ministers of Africa to talk about how could we accelerate the integration of education in adaptation strategies. And in COP26, you may remember, they doubled the money that's going to adaptation. And again, the question is, are we knocking on the door of those people who are thinking about spending that money, that this should go to, some of this should go to education. But are we kind of in those conversations is the question. So the challenge is, we believe no, education has not been prioritized as a climate solution. We have some evidence on this. Lots of youth say it's really important, but only 3 countries have actually committed to national climate curricula. Less than 40% of NDCs include plans for skilling or reskilling. That's the national determined contributions. 90% of climate finance, as I was saying, is devoted to renewable energies, transport, and so on. So there's very little in that actually is dedicated to education. So quickly, how do we now frame this? Together with our friends, part of this group, we came up with these 3 buckets. The first bucket is, we call it climate literacy for advocacy and behavioral change. And that is probably the bucket that has had the most attention. Most people have talked about integrating climate literacy in curricula, and there has been quite a lot of activity in there. Even at COP26, there was a meeting that sort of covered all of that. What we also said within this is, let's connect this literacy piece also with the broader education environment, schoolyards, school infrastructure, e-buses. Actually, this is something that Jeff Bezos is doing. He is replacing or trying to replace the entire fleet of school buses in the United States to make them e-buses. And the question is, can you connect all of that to also the learning and the behavioral change? And these children who grow up driving e-buses can take this home and change the world that way. So that's number one. We really need to think about that. Number 2 is obviously this whole piece about skilling. And here it's not just about technical skills, like do I have the skills to work in green energy versus coal plants, but actually much broader than that. It's about what we would call transformational skills, skills that are about problem solving, being resilient, being able to adapt, etc. So there's a kind of full breadth of green skills that's needed. And then the final bucket, which is one we as at the Education Commission are focusing on quite a bit, is this piece of adaptation. So can we really think about how we can place ourselves in the conversations on adaptation when countries are developing their adaptation strategies? What element of that is actually focusing on education? And so there's again a piece there about skilling, but also a piece about infrastructure and resilience. And I actually spent 5 years in Vietnam and Indonesia. In Vietnam, the Vietnamese government at some stage decided to never build a single-story school again, to only build two-story schools. And the reason for this was often there are floods in Vietnam, and this second story becomes a kind of retreat. If there are floods, people can actually go to the second floor. The school actually becomes a haven for the community. And in some cases, they even had ramps to bring animals into these buildings. So it's really thinking about how can we make infrastructure resilient? How do we get the data? So when there are climate impacts, we are prepared to react and respond quickly. So this is a little bit of an overview. I want to call on, we have in the report, you will see a number of ideas about what we could do in these three areas in terms of advocacy, research, funding, and so on. But I wanted to highlight one thing as well, and that is to invite you tomorrow. There's slides missing here because the technical issues of bringing this event together, challenging as they were, but I wanted to actually highlight that tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we have a session together with Dubai Cares and Rewired, which is called Rewiring Education for People and Planet. And we will be talking about what kind of ecosystem do you need to create to bring all these actors together to transform education so it can intersect with climate, with health, with all these other sectors that are really essential. Not only they need education, but also we need them. And so we will be talking about that. And if you want to find out, I know Tariq, the CEO of Dubai Cares, who is here, will present on this really important framework that will set out a path forward of how we can do this. So Deb can wave the report as well. If you want to go online and look at it, we have some recommendations there. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too long.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me now. Thank you so much, because Lisbeth and I only spoke this morning, and she's valiantly jumped in to present this report, which I really appreciate, and I hope everybody else does too. I know that you've brought some little cards with you. Maybe if you put them at the back so people can pick them up as they go out and find out more about the session on Thursday. Thank you very much. So I know that Lisbeth can't stay for the whole session. What we normally do in a circle meeting is we invite discussion from participants. Now, we're really lucky today because we have 4 people who have already said they'd like to talk about some of the things that they are doing. We have Alex from Teach for All, Judith from the FCDO, Jeff from GPE, and Ada, who is online from an association in Romania, who has been working on this for a long time. I would like to invite you online, you as participants, you as speakers, to participate now in this discussion. So that might mean that you have a question for Lisbeth. It might mean that you have something that you are doing that you would like to share because it speaks to the theme of climate and education. So the floor is open. I'm going to ask one of my 4 speakers to volunteer to start us off. Perhaps Alex, you can talk us through a little bit about what the what the Summer Institutes are doing. I don't know if you can be seen by participants. Maybe if you want to sit here.
Shall I?
Yeah, would you mind stopping? Thank you very much. But please do, if you've got something that you'd like to add, if you've got a question, if you've got something you'd like to share, put your hands up and we can come to you and we will fit in and out.
What do we do with this?
Super. Nothing. I think that's just so that the people online can see what's going on. Great stuff.
So I'm Alex Beard. I'm with Teach for All. I lead our global learning lab. And just a bit of context on what we do. We're a global network of organizations in 60 countries around the world. And in each of those countries, there's an organization that's recruiting often young leaders into a 2-year teacher leadership development program, where they go into classrooms in the most marginalized communities in those countries and then go on to spend their lives and careers working for educational equity. And there are about 100,000 of those leaders now around the world in roles as teachers, school leaders, policymakers, social entrepreneurs, all working towards this shared purpose. And so if our shared purpose has historically been equity, increasingly we're asking ourselves what it means if we centre climate justice, climate education as part of that shared purpose that we're all working towards worldwide. And so we've begun looking at this over the past couple of years. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how we're preparing the teachers in our network as leaders on this topic. The research shows from the UN from last year that more or less all teachers, 95% of teachers, think climate education is vitally important, but less than a fifth of teachers feel adequately prepared in any way to teach their students, whether it's about mitigation or adaptation on any form of this stuff. And we've spoken to teachers across our network, and we know how they feel about this. They articulate a clear concern and a desire to do something. They also feel a lack of confidence in being able to respond adequately, and even a sense of hypocrisy. They ask if they really have permission to take on this topic, where they maybe aren't feeling like they are the best examples for their students to be looking up to in the way that they live. But we're beginning to see a big response across our network, amongst all of those organizations, across that huge network of leaders, to those challenges, to meet those teachers where they are. So I just want to talk about two things that we're doing. They're around capacity building and giving these teachers permission to act. So on the capacity building question, many of our organizations, they all put these teachers through 2 years of training. Many of them are now dedicating time at their initial teacher training institutes, their summer institutes, to training teachers on climate education. This is happening in Uganda, in Austria, in Zimbabwe, amongst many other places. And they're dedicating days of initial teacher training to helping their teachers, first of all, to understand the science on climate education, understand how to talk to their students in an age-appropriate way about what's going on, understand how to mobilize their students, whether that's around adaptation or mitigation. And if we can do that for our whole network, then what we can hopefully see in the future is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of leaders throughout education systems who are going forth with this understanding of what it takes to prepare young people, going into positions often of real power within education systems. The two, for example, in the UK, the Chief Advisor on Education to our Prime Minister and the Chief Advisor at the DFE on Education are both Teach First ambassadors. They went through this programme 10 or so years ago. And then on permission, we believe in these teachers seeing themselves as leaders. First of all, we talk about this concept of teaching as collective leadership. So we want teachers in their classrooms, not just to see themselves as people that are conveying knowledge to their students, although of course that's important, but as seeing themselves as leaders in their classrooms and their students as leaders as well. So they're empowering them. And that's happening a lot in climate education too. We have a teacher in Zimbabwe, for example, Edson, and he's teaching all of his subjects through climate education. He takes his students out into the world around the school on a daily basis. They're planting trees. They have an organic farm, and he's teaching all of his subjects through that prism. Another teacher in the Basque Country in Bilbao, Egowitz, he is teaching his students about the circular economy. He does all of his teaching through these big projects, focused on things like how to use biofuel or generate biofuel and what that might mean for transport. And he's doing that so brilliantly that he and his students have now been invited to be key advisors for the Basque government on the circular economy and how they can have a circular economy strategy in the city of Bilbao. And then just finally, the third thing that we're doing is around creating community for all of these leaders. We have about 250 now climate education, social entrepreneurs, school leaders, teachers who are coming together on a regular basis, many of whom are online right now as well, joining us here, to build a sense of shared purpose around climate education, to build a sense of solidarity, build a sense of a movement, and more than anything, to learn from one another about what is working on this topic in their different contexts. We believe fundamentally in the power of the global ecosystem and organizations coming together, especially to learn from one another, and that global ecosystem is then informing what's happening in local ecosystems, where we're hoping that these leaders eventually get into positions that surround students in the ecosystem all around them, whether they're teachers, school leaders, policymakers, and they're bringing this focus on climate education to those roles in their careers. So that's what's going on a little bit in our network.
Thanks very much, Alex. I see that there was a comment from Tarek. Did you want to respond to something that Elizabeth was saying? Please jump in.
Thank you, Nora, and good seeing you after so many years. I just want to mention we've been embarking upon climate and education since 2019. And of course, COVID came, it went into a hiatus, and now we can see movement happening globally in education and climate. And Alex mentioned examples, and a lot of countries and a lot of experts are talking about how can we solve it, and let's speak to the youth, and youth are the future. I come from a different angle, to be honest with you, because I'm a strong believer into the youth. But the youth of today, whatever you equip them with today, won't be sufficient enough to solve the problem. What we need to do, we have to be patient. We have to instill into our curriculums in the school these subjects. I'm not talking about a full subject for 9 months, but extra curriculum probably, but built into the curriculums. In the beginning, for the early learners from grade 1 to 4 probably, or 5, we teach them the theoretical angle of it, climate and planet and green. And then towards their the intermediate level, before the secondary, we put it into practice, exactly what Alex is saying. So if the first 3-4 years they're just listening and seeing visuals, to not, I mean, in my days it was a textbook with a small picture. Now you can go into virtual reality and see the change itself. But if you put those videos and everything from that age, you instill it into their minds, and then the second chapter of schooling, you test them and let them feel and go out in the greenery, like what Alex said. And then the third chapter, which is the final chapter, you actually start engaging them to put some solutions, recommendations. I don't care at this stage of life. We have many hundreds of years left. I don't care about this stage of life, whether those are crazy ideas, because now we need those crazy ideas. But if you instill this from the schooling age, you have made one full generation in the world graduate with a mindset of climate. The next step is put it into universities as proper subject and as what you're going to study for the rest of your life, which is climate. Hence, when you go to your first job, you are already equipped mentally and physically and practically on what changes you will do within the organization you're going to work with. What's happening now, that person, fast forward, goes through the system and then goes to the job and starts creating, what can I do for my planet? Let's start from the beginning. Let's have one generation to start with to instill this into the schooling system. Hence forward, we put it into our universities and colleges as proper subjects to solve these issues. You see, everything will be led in the future by the youth, but let us equip the youth since the early years while they're in their grade 1s and 2s and 3s. Thank you.
Thanks, Tarek. And you've actually led us very well into the next person I'm going to ask to speak, which is a woman from Romania called Ada Lungu, who is online. She has been working on something very similar. Looking forward to a session tomorrow. See you on Thursday. So I'm just going to...
Sorry, Leon, I have to go because there's another session happening. I just wanted to support you guys. Thank you.
Hello. So hopefully you can all see Ada, roughly.
Yes, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ada, yes, and some people can see you, but you're on a fairly small screen, but we can all hear you.
All right, thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I'm speaking to you from Bucharest, Romania. I represent Voles Association. It's an NGO. And I think what I'm going to tell you about is a very practical national experience we've been having for years, but it touches on so many of the points you've already raised today. So we've been doing environmental education for the last 11 years in Romania. We started back when people were actually wondering what environmental education is. And we've arrived to the point where today this has been declared a national priority by our president. And climate education will be included in the formal school curricula starting next year. So I believe that's to be a huge step forward. What we've been doing through this extracurricular program called the Recycling Patrol is that we have worked with 4,500 teachers from kindergartens and high schools and schools from all over the country. And 130,000 kids and students have been enrolled so far in this program in these 10 years. But the main thing is, this has not been just a learning experience for them, because they actually managed to transform their schools, their homes, and their communities. And I think we are coming to this point of behavioral change that we are all interested in. So what we basically do as a bit of context is we take several sustainability related topics and priorities. We turn them into educational materials, challenges, games, competitions, and we launch all that to the national level while guiding the teachers, not just to teach the kids all those things, but also to engage them and empower them to actually produce the changes they would like to see. And since connecting with the Learning Planet circle earlier this year, I have discovered that at least 3 of the key elements who ensured the success and longevity of this program in Romania are also connected to this philosophy of taking care of oneself, the others, and the planet. And I would very much like to share these things with you because I believe they are more relevant now than ever. And I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on these. So the first one would be that for us, climate education meant taking the learning process beyond the school borders, meant taking knowledge out of the classroom and into the community. It meant taking the kids out of the classroom and into the community. And I think Alex was saying just now about a teacher who is teaching everything through climate related topics, and that's very exciting. And this is a bit what we did as well. We designed information and knowledge not to just be put on a blackboard or on a piece of paper, but to become a real life habit, skill, to encourage active citizenship. And maybe the best success indicator of this program is that by now we have thousands of homes and thousands of families who have adopted a more sustainable way of life, because at some point their kids came back from school and said, let's start to recycle, let's start to change things at home, because I've learned something very interesting in school today. So by making learning fun, by making children passionate about what they found out, it spread like wildfire. So this is why over the years, many of these teams have transform their communities. There are villages in Romania who have started recycling for the first time because of these children, or who are starting celebrating Earth Day or World Environment Day or Water Day for the first time, who have cleaned places which were polluted by garbage for years. So this is what active volunteering can do. So climate education is about life. So we should always design it to become a real life habit. Now, the second idea is that in our experience, teachers were the key to the success of this process, but they need to be listened to. I think they need to be involved to co-create anything, policy, programs, projects. They need logistical support and reliable resources and recognition. Because I don't know in other countries, but in Romania, I can tell you climate education is something teachers do on top of what their other tasks are. So we were always aware we were adding responsibilities to the teachers who volunteered in the program. And we tried to maybe not complicate their lives even more than they already are. So when we reached out to teachers, it was with this conversation that this is what we as an NGO would like to achieve. This is our goal, but what do you teachers need to make this happen? Because we know where we want to get, but you have the teaching method, you know your communities, you know your students. We are not, imposing a way of doing things. We are listening to you. And I think it's very important to co-create policies with the teachers so that climate education becomes a drive and not a burden. And the third thing is, how should I put it? Hope. Or if you want an antidote to eco-anxiety, because everything related to the environment can be overwhelmingly negative. And sometimes young people feel that even if they are doing everything right in their backyard, in their school, in their communities, it may still be too little too late. So why bother? Climate education cannot function without hope, in my experience. So for the teachers and the pupils we know in Romania, being connected with global movements, with global communities, such as Learning Planet Circle, really increases their trust in their ability to make things happen, to actually make a difference. And we've had a very exciting experience in the beginning of this month. We participated in the European Green Week, which culminated with World Environment Day. And we launched a national challenge to teachers to take their kids out and help them discover biodiversity. It would seem that Romania is on top when it comes to biodiversity in Europe. So we need to learn how to protect it. And these children were so excited because we partnered up with another two NGOs who actually managed to lobby successfully to our government to have 2 national parks declared as protected areas. So the children could actually see that even a bunch of volunteers through active citizenship can achieve something as amazing as getting the state to recognize and protect 2 natural areas. So this is what I'm talking about, hope. And somebody in the room was saying something about raising a generation with a certain mindset. I think we actually managed to do that because there are kids now who are like in kindergarten when they joined the program, but now they are students and they are taking all that experience with them into their adult lives. And this for us is so uplifting. So to sum all this up, we've been doing this successfully in Romania, and mind that Romania is still lagging behind in so many respects, is still catching up on so many environmental standards. But the educational program worked beautifully because, first of all, we made learning fun and practical. We encouraged the communication and exchange between schools and communities. We worked with teachers very closely in establishing methods and tools. We built partnerships with administrations, state institutions, businesses, NGOs, media, and we always looked out for global trends and opportunities. And I really hope you relate to some of these things. I'm very excited to hear what your experiences were. Thank you again to Leonora for having me today. And I'm really, really excited to move forward with you in I don't know, lifting climate education to where it's supposed to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ada. That's really kind of you to join us. And I think there's a couple of messages that are coming through quite clearly. It's, as Elizabeth said at the beginning, it's something that we all feel and we're trying to do. And it's important to have some hope. And I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to call this meeting. It's one of the reasons this circle exists. Some of us have heard feedback from others that we feel a bit alone. And we can actually see, you know, sitting in this room online, there are a lot of people who've joined us for the live stream. We're not alone. There are a lot of people who are working together who believe that this is important. And this is something that I think Earth Day are going to talk about a little bit more in their call to action. So we've heard a little bit from the national level, things that are going on in Teach for All and from Ada. We've got Jeff from the GPE and Judith from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, both of whom have kind of more global perspectives. Which of you would like to speak first? And then we've got some participation from the audience. Go for it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I'm Judith Herbertson, as I've been introduced, and I'm the head of the Girls Education Department at the UK's FCDO. As you might expect, I'm a passionate advocate for the power of girls' education, but having spent the last 3 years in Bangladesh as then DFID's development director, I'm also deeply concerned about climate change and about the challenges it poses to education and to development and to poverty reduction, as well as we've heard, to the future of the planet. There is, however, a risk, I think, that we're sort of trying to establish within the FCDO that we frame education and climate and that nexus only at the global level. But why would we assume one country's priorities to be the same as another? We're very careful to contextualize and tailor when we talk about education, girls' education. And it's very important that we look at the unique set of coincidences, if you like, in this nexus. And I think we should start from the starting point that each region, each country, even each village has its own unique relationship with climate change, much as it may not wish to. Its own unique set of resources, including in terms of levels of education, awareness, expertise, and therefore its own unique path to address the challenges ahead. There are, however, commonalities in lower income, lower middle income countries. They are very likely nowadays to be on the front line of the climate crisis, already dealing with its negative impacts. We know this to be particularly true for women and girls, and those who are marginalised by poverty, disability, other factors. Learning levels are already likely to be low, and education delivery is likely to face major challenges, be that shortages of teachers, textbooks, classrooms, the right kind of infrastructure, all of this underpinned by a shortfall in financing. And therefore, there are going to be competing priorities. So when we wave the flags about crises, we need to be reasonably helpful and constructive and positive about the way we frame this. There are mutual wins from addressing climate change and education together, but there will be trade-offs. We keep pressing countries to give up coal-fired power plants. Well, they can't do that until they've got a steady stream of sustainable energy. And the same goes potentially with education and climate change. We can't ignore that the higher a country's educational overall level of achievement, the higher their emissions. But this does not mean that by improving education, access and quality, we're doing the wrong thing. But it does mean when we're talking to partner governments and when they are talking to us about their problems, we need to try and understand this very complex set of interdependencies between different objectives, the immediate and also the sort of scary long-term horizon. So it's great to meet so many advocates who are all talking about the same issues. I think there is still a long way to go on this. Obviously, COP26, I hope, raised a lot of red flags and a lot of anxiety and set out a pathway forward. There were a lot of financial commitments, a lot of policy commitments. But on this particular nexus, we still have quite a long way to go. And I also share a degree of frustration that the TES is currently a little bit silent on climate. And I would encourage anybody who's got a bit of fire in their bellies really to lobby for a more prominent focus by the time we reach September. FCDO is therefore prioritising quite a lot of work on these twin crises, and we're currently developing what we call in civil service speak a position paper, which is basically a fairly weighty policy paper, which we will launch just ahead of or at COP27, and I mean COP27 this year, in other words. Part of our follow-up to COP26, but also setting out how we're planning to step up efforts to meaningfully address the interlinkages. And it will focus predominantly on low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, and that menu, if you like, of challenges and some of the solutions. And then what we're trying to do is target our resources and our policy expertise where we think we can have the biggest impact on those worst affected. I'll stop there in the interest of being brief.
Thanks very much, Judith. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that we're running out of time and would like to hear from people in the audience. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of the organisers for this. We're very happy to be here as the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. Our job is to mobilise funds and partnerships to transform education in the lower income countries of the world. Just this morning, I've come from the meeting of our ministers representing 80 ministers from the low income and lower middle income countries. They sat together. They said, we need to figure out what it is we want out of a transforming education agenda. And they published and they discussed a short communique, which is now online. I'd welcome you to have a look at it. It's only a page and a half, and I was really impressed that amongst all of the things they could have talked about, climate change and climate action were referenced a couple of times there. You know, us as climate action folk would say that's not enough, but the fact is it's front of mind for these these ministers who represent 80 of the world's poorest countries. That's about 650 million school-aged children. That's where it's got to start. Increasingly, we're hearing from them about an interest in what can we, as the Global Partnership for Education, mobilise either partners and technical support or finances to help them with the barriers they see to transforming their education systems. And they are identifying climate change impacts as incredible barriers and the need to develop climate smart education systems, everything from curriculum through to infrastructure and all that's been talked about today. Just earlier this month, in collaboration with the FCDO, we brought ministers together from the affected countries, those that were most vocal about this. I'm talking about Cambodia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, the countries in the Caribbean. And they came together with climate scientists and climate activists for a few days of workshop to really sit down and try and pull this apart, to do as Lisbeth was saying before. You know, we talk about climate and education, but where are those connection points? And for us, the definition of those connection points and what needs to be done about it and what can be done about it needs to be driven by those government officials, those political leaders in the countries that are most affected. And so that's where we're working. We strongly believe that education should be a central pillar of climate action, and we need to urgently address the intensifying impacts of climate on education, and therefore really supportive of trying to drive a more powerful movement for educational transformation that can help avert the planetary crisis that we're all facing. So, as I say, that's why we're working with partners, figuring out just what those connections are and how we can develop a shared understanding of what a climate smart education system looks like. And what are the barriers that need to be broken down to get there? And what sort of support do those countries need in order to make that happen in their countries? We think that there's a way, and we're developing a sort of a program, if you like, of support that is not just financial, but also technical, to match the technical experts with the needs in those countries, providing expertise, solutions and resources to ministries of education to reinforce national adaptation capacity in education and reinforce more resilient education systems. So we really look forward to collaborating with all of you here, all the people across this panel. Please count us in on your circle, and if anyone is interested, just go to the globalpartnership.org news, and you'll see this short communique, which is essentially about transforming education and what the lower income countries believe are the priorities. And as I say, you will see that amongst those challenges they face, they clearly identify climate change and climate action as a necessary tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and Judith as well. I would like to open this up. I know there's a couple of comments, and I'd like to leave enough space for the call to action, which is very important and touches on something that Judith just said. Yes, you're from libraries, is that right?
Thanks very much. Thank you to all the speakers. This has been really enlightening. My name is Claire McGuire. I'm from the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. We're the global voice of libraries. And I think it would be interesting to bring the voice from the non-formal education sector to this discussion, as libraries have been really active in climate education, even if they are not using the language around action for climate empowerment. But at IFLA, we've been engaging in several different processes to work with the Glasgow Work Program and try to raise awareness among library professionals and the larger sector as to the input of libraries, both in educating, providing resources, providing programming, whether it's within the schools or extracurricularly, but also in modeling sustainable behavior. And in that, I think this goes beyond the formal education and into lifelong learning, where community members have opportunities to engage with one another, engage in their communities, and really in a hands-on way learn about what action for climate empowerment is in a really local context. And in that, I would put on a slightly different hat, and IFLA is on the global steering committee of the Climate Heritage Network. It's an international network of organizations in culture, cultural heritage, and the arts that are active in climate action. And one of the main goals is to reach beyond the culture sector and to show that there's a need for a culturally specific education on climate, but also there's a lot of solutions that can be found in resilience building, in traditions and knowledge systems that are held within cultural, different cultural heritage or different cultural practices from people around the world. So I see a huge possibility of collaboration in this case, both from the library perspective and from the larger culture/education sector. So from IFLA, we are very happy to coordinate, to collaborate with you. And I thank you again for this information and for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much. If any of our other speakers would like to respond, feel free. True. Is there anyone? So we had one down here, and then I'll come to you. Please.
Hi, I'm Alice Cornish from Better Purpose. First of all, I just wanted to kind of echo what's been said. It's really, really welcome, this discussion, and really great to see the report and the different perspectives and best practices that have been shared. I think I had a reflection, particularly when seeing that map of the countries that are most at risk of climate change. And it made me think about some really terrifying statistics around literacy that have come out recently, and particularly the statistic that in lower middle income countries, 70% of 10-year-olds can't read for meaning. And actually in sub-Saharan Africa, that statistic goes up to 89%. I was sort of thinking about some of the really important messages around climate literacy and green skills, and was wondering what your perspectives are on the role of foundational literacy and numeracy in preparing people to become more engaged in some of this dialogue. So there's a sort of question there, and also within that, perhaps a sort of a call for foundational literacy and numeracy to be a really big part of your portfolio of actions, and also the playbook. And I wondered sort of what role it was playing in those really practical, important pieces of work that are moving us forward.
Can I just say, oops, Daisy, one word. Thank you very much indeed for raising that. I was briefed because I was conscious we're running out of time, but it's a great example of why we're pushing foundational literacy along with lots of other people. Foundational skills, not just literacy, numeracy, learning how to learn, socio-emotional skills to deal with risks, challenges, to create that resilience, because you can't become an expert or even an 8-year-old who understands the impacts of climate if you can't do those basics. And people sometimes criticize us for saying, oh, you're limiting lower income countries, just to learning how to read and write and do a little bit of maths. Of course we're not. We're trying to open doors. And the only way you can become more proficient, more intrigued, more interested, more expert at anything is if you've got a basic level of education. And so for us, this is a great example of where that nexus interconnects. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to you for mentioning this. That's why in this kind of 3 buckets thing on the right-hand side, we really that's really about sort of basic education and the basics of education. And what I have felt is that in the conversations, everybody's now so excited about this connection. We do tend to sort of lean in the climate literacy bucket in the left-hand side, and so that's why we kind of created these 3 buckets, because a lot of the resilience is it's got nothing to do with knowing about the climate necessarily. It's about problem solving. It's about reading, about being able to respond. So that is a really important point you're making.
Thank you very much for that. And we have somebody at the back. Please, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. My name is Ben Clench. I just set up a charity called The Golden Teacher. And we've created a web app that can go on feature phones for mobiles to teach teachers about using a smart technique in their teaching, but it's content free, and it's free for all participants, and very good for secondary and primary schools basically. We tried to get in contact with GICS, with GBE, but haven't had any success. And anyway, yeah, so we're still trying, because it's just so that we're trying to find people who want to use our education for teachers, find it useful in their circumstances. But I have been very much a protester about the climate, and I really want to say to you that you talk about how this should be come into education, and I mean, like, within the UK, David King, who he ran the think tank on climate change a few years ago. He said, quite a few years ago, he said, we have 3 years to sort this out. Otherwise, it's all just baked in. And I want to say to you, we might be too late. We might be absolutely buggered. And really, the only thing that can actually save the world from climate disaster is what the lady was saying about Jeff Bezos. he's the world's richest man. I mean, like, he is the reason that we have climate disaster. We need to really degrow the higher income countries and allow the middle and bottom income countries to grow anyway. But it is the wealthy nations have to stop growing and accumulating wealth. And degrowth within the high income countries could be a really good thing, you know, a 4-day week, guaranteed income. I don't think that's something to be scared of. And I think that's something, you know, this international conference about education, we need to know how to put pressure on our own governments to do the right thing, because they're obviously not, as the last COP in Scotland came up with, a load of rubbish. So thank you. That's all.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. Thank you so much. I think we all feel this really deep inside as well. And this is and for us who have children, I think the speaker from Romania said it so nicely at the end, the sort of the mental health pressure and the sort of the gloom that is amongst many of our teenagers and 20-year-olds about the future is pretty deep. But I would also say that we need to educate ourselves also about what the climate sector has learned about economic growth and climate change. And there is actually a global commission that has been working since 2013 called the New Climate Economy. And they got the world's biggest experts together, and they showed that economic growth, there was always this feeling that economic growth was always bad for the environment, but there are pathways to growth that can be good for the environment. And it's really about building a sustainable green economy rather than a unsustainable economy. And I think we need to also, as education actors, create our own understanding around that, I think, to be able to engage with these other groups in a really effective way. And you're absolutely right. The pathway to that is what we've been talking about, creating opportunity for people to work in different sectors, etc. So, but you should look at the New Climate Economy. They've done a massive amount of work trying to show how these two things don't need to be polar opposites.
So thank you very much. Please, if you have anything that you'd like to add, we've got, go for it.
Hi everyone. I'm Uma Sarkar. I'm with I'm with the Generation Unlimited and UNICEF, and great. I met Lenora in the Schools 2030 forum, and I've had lots of discussions with Elizabeth around in the past. So I'm very myself personally very passionate about this issue, and I think it's so critical and really important for education to be front and center of this. And I would agree that the Transforming Education Summit, if we can have this more highlighted than it is today, as some of the speakers have said, and be really happy to join in doing that. Just to say, I mean, some of the things I think from Generation Unlimited and UNICEF's perspective, it is a public-private partnership with young people, and we'd be very interested to collaborate on this Circle initiative. And I think recently we had a soft launch of something called the Green Jobs Pact, a partnership of the UNICEF, ILO, and UNEP, looking not only at jobs, because in Lisbeth's presentation, just looking at how this will impact on employment, but what are the kinds of skills? What do we mean by green skills, and how do we prepare young people for the future of work, whether it be in jobs or entrepreneurship? Well, and this whole area of flexible skills for a just transition. really came up. I think it's the second bucket that was presented, as well as it being potentially a powerful adaptation strategy. And I felt in that discussion at Stockholm Plus 50, it was a bit inadequate, that whole discussion around what do we mean by skills and how do we define that? And I think that's where we as an education community really have to come up strongly there. And there's also another partnership we're recently forming with GIAP, the Global Alliance for Energy, People and Planet. Some of the people that lead that are on the board of Generation Unlimited. And we're going to do a partnership around a youth-led social entrepreneurship and green ventures in the space and skilling. And we're preparing in preparation for COP27 and 28. And I think these kinds of things, we'd be happy to collaborate with this coalition. And I think it's a really important and crucial area. So just wanted to add that point.
Thank you very much. We're going to, I see that there are some other people who'd like to speak, and I'm really pleased. I think you're in the right place. Look around you. There are other people who are really interested in this topic and working on it. We know that there are other meetings starting at 2, so I'm going to hand over to Matt from Earth Day. We've heard from quite a few people about the need to put climate on the agenda at TES. So Matt, over to you. Oh, thank you very much, Elizabeth, who has to leave. If any of the other speakers need to leave now, please do. Is there the remote control? Yeah. Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Well, first, I just want to reiterate what everybody said. It's great to be a part of this conversation. Excuse me. I am Matt Arouk. I'm the Director of Global Education with earthday.org. I'll tell you a little bit about our organization, then some of the work we've been doing in the space, and then some of the work that we've helped to collaborate specifically for this summit, and hopefully some steps that we can all take here moving into the New York summit and then later into COP27 as the circle moves toward COP28. So the first thing that folks often ask me when they hear that I work with earthday.org is they wonder what I do with the rest of the year. But we do work the rest of the year. It's not just on Earth Day, but we are many people's first introduction into the environmental movement. So many of the conversations that we've been hearing today, and we heard from our colleague from Romania, that many students are kind of getting their first taste of this movement around Earth Day for cleanups or tree plantings or what have you. So our mission really is to kind of diversify, educate, and activate the global environmental movement. So expanding that movement, right? And part of our kind of call to action is to find the really great work that all of you are doing, center that work, get that work out, support that work, and advocate on your behalf. So some of the ways that we do this through this climate literacy campaign, and we organize this around 2 pillars that we've been hearing about time and time again in this conversation. The first is this focus on civic engagement. And we see that in these kind of great global cleanups or tree plantings or teach-ins or all of these kind of actions that you see around Earth Day, where we're trying to inspire a generation and then support that through curriculum and materials or pointing them in the direction of all of your programs. And that leading into many of kind of the skills, the knowledge and skills that are required to participate in civic and political actions within their communities, and transitioning those into green jobs. So our focus over this campaign is to ensure that all learners everywhere have access to high quality climate and environmental education that has strong civic education, strong civic component for the green jobs of the future. And how have we done that? Well, in the lead up to COP26, we put out a petition with a number of collaborators that was calling on commitments from governments for urgent action. And so we put out the kind of first call in for Glasgow in COP26, and we've kind of continued this call into COP27 in Egypt. So the URL is there, but I'm happy to share this. If you just Google Earth Day climate literacy, this petition will appear. but we have more than 250 million signatories from our organizational partners. At the individual level, we have close to 6,000 individual signatures from 126 countries. So it is kind of a global campaign, and we're urging all of you to kind of get in touch with your ministers. And we heard earlier about this kind of meeting at COP between ministers of education and ministers of the environment. We've asked the summit here to help organize in New York a meeting that brings together ministers of the environment, ministers of education, and ministers of finance to have a more comprehensive discussion around how we can integrate all three of those pieces. On the conversation of COP27, to go to kind of what Elizabeth asked for before, is how do we bring the two spaces together, the climate space and the education space? I think COP is a great way to do that. We're proposing for COP27 what we think might be the first ever climate education pavilion. So if you're interested in collaborating, I heard lots of calls for collaboration. We are looking for partners in that endeavor, both content, but definitely on the fundraising side, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift to get us out there and get all of that set up. So if anyone is interested in collaborating on that, we'd be happy to work with all of you. And then here are some of the signatories. I'll blow through this so that we can have some more time for discussion, but it's a pretty broad coalition that cuts across labor unions, non-formal sector, higher education, K through 12 education, all sorts of interesting groups, large and small, from all around the world. And then specifically, if we kind of look at the agenda for here, and we've heard this in the discussion, thinking of climate change not only as kind of a pedagogy and content piece, but looking how climate change is transformed by and helping to transforming education, right? So at the kind of policy level, at the pedagogy level, thinking about school infrastructure, and then how climate is going to impact access to schooling, increased disasters. The Washington Post just put out a series of articles about heat days, so schools being canceled for heat. So this is going to be an ever increasing occurrence moving forward into the future, and it's important to kind of think about that as we are designing and considering the transformation of education into the future, right? And then I would just add, kind of as I've been listening in here, we've heard a number of individual programs, right, and with lots of technical expertise, but ultimately addressing the climate is both a technical and a social problem. So we need to start thinking about this as a socio-technical system and kind of thinking about how socio-technical systems operate and teasing them apart. The other thing that we've heard in terms of mindsets here, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but we put out a letter in the pre-sum. We looked at the thematic documents, and we kind of pulled out the areas that were related to climate. And as many people noted, there wasn't a ton, at least in the first drafts, but I am happy to note that we participated in many of kind of the deliberations and consultations that took place. We sent a letter to the summit organizers, and in the second draft, there is some additional language around climate change, particularly in track 2, and there's a note in track 5. And I would encourage all of you, as you're participating in meetings moving forward for the rest of the summit, encourage your ministers, encourage your delegations to continue to kind of place this at the center of the agenda and raise it up so that we can ensure that it's on the meeting agenda come September. So some of these kind of things that we're asking for, including climate as a cross-cutting theme across the action tracks, similar to the way we discussed COVID-19. I was speaking with a youth activist a few weeks ago. We talked about COVID-19 as the appetizer before kind of the main events of climate change really impacts the way education systems are run around the world. Creating kind of specific spaces for dialogue around climate change education and climate literacy programs, supporting side events similar to this one. So it's great to have this with all of you. I've noted this kind of ministerial event to bring together all the different ministers from finance, environment, and education. And then, of course, kind of creating an increased global funding to address climate change in and through education with emphasis on equity, inclusion, and justice. And this letter was signed by a number of folks that are here in this circle, not surprisingly, but we would love to have your support. Again, you can message me and I'm happy to share the letter with you to get your signatures. We got a number of youth activists on board as well. I will also note that probably a gap that we'll see here is we're missing some youth voices. Johnny Dabrowski from Fridays for the Future Education, we were hoping to have him come in and share some of his demands for the summit. But I'm looking around the room and I'm noticing that we don't have these youth voices that would be so important to have up on this stage, kind of telling us how they feel. We have an idea, but it would be great to hear directly from them, their own perspectives. So what can you do to kind of take action today? Continue to kind of work to center these, and then tomorrow sign on to our letter and then continue to advocate on behalf of climate education, climate literacy programs for the summit meetings in New York, and then later at COP27 in Egypt, and then moving on and forward. So I'll stop there. And here's my contact information if you want to get in touch. I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
I think we might have to finish by 2, so we might have to take questions outside, because I know lots of people have another meeting at 2 that they'd like to get to, and we'd like to finish so that you can do that. Thank you very much, Matthew. We are at the end of our session now, so it leaves me to thank all of you for coming, for participating, all of our speakers in the audience and sitting up here. This is a divide that is artificial. So thank you very much to everybody who participated. Thank you for people who asked the difficult questions. I would like to say that I think you're in the right place. I think that I've heard that there is hope, and I've heard that there's frustration. If you look around the room, you're probably here because you think this is important. So talk to the people who are here over the course of the next 3 days. This is what we're trying to create. It's a community who collaborate with multiple solutions on something that we all think is important. There's not one solution. We all bring something, and that's what this is. You've heard the call to action from Earth Day. Matthew will be around for the next 3 days. We've got a letter that you can put your name to, and he's happy to share it. From our side, we would be delighted if you'd like to join the circle. There is a bit.ly link that you can follow, or you can click the QR code. It's a 3-question. It says name, organization, and why would you like to join? So the barriers to entry are low, but we are looking for people who would actively like to contribute. I'll be around for the next few days, and I'd be delighted to speak to any and all of you who would like to continue the conversation. So if you haven't had lunch, you can now go and eat it. Well done to those of you who brought it with you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the pre-summit.